2001. It was a simpler time. The PS2 had just launched the year before in North America. Yeah, I'm taking you back to 2001 once again, and this time for something befitting of the season. What if I told you there was a horror game produced by the director of Ghosts and Goblins, with scenarios done by the Swery of Deadly Premonition and D4 fame, and it's set in the Arctic, like The Thing? Well, let me tell you about a little game called Extermination. Extermination is an early-era PS2 survival horror, made to flaunt the PS2 tech as well as the ingenuity of the team making it. The game is developed by Deep Space, a company best known for Extermination, and Hungry Ghosts, a Japan-exclusive horror game which, upon further research, actually seems more unique than Extermination, but I digress. Extermination had a decent amount of promotion around the time of its release. It was even heavily featured in the Winter 2001 Jam Pack, which is where I first encountered it. Yeah, this is from a bygone era where you could buy demos. Crazy, I know. I remember thinking it was pretty interesting, from that demo alone, but it would be many years before I would play anything past that intro. I briefly revisited the game back in college, but I didn't quite finish it. I don't know, I probably got distracted by something like Shadows of the Damned. In Extermination, you play as Dennis, a Spec Op Marine whose unit has been sent to Antarctica to investigate a top-secret research facility where clearly something bad has gone down. The intro to this game just exudes B-movie energy. I mean, where do I begin? Well, for one, the lip sync in this intro is off.
Semper Fi! Go out there and show the world what Marines are made of.
And worse, it's not just the dialogue that's off sync. Even the sound effects aren't synced properly. At first, I thought that my capture card was messing up because the rest of the game didn't have sync issues for sound effects. I even went back to watch the intro without the capture card. Still off. I finally ended up watching other people's recordings of the intro, and I can rest easy knowing that the audio is just off sync. Secondly, the voice acting and dialogue in this game is just cheesy. I don't like harping too much on bad voice acting because I totally get it. It's hard to sound natural even when you're just being yourself, but man, are the inflections just all over the place. Most prominently with Dennis's voice actor. He'll occasionally have these weird, off-put deliveries that don't match up, and then there's times where he's a bit too stoic.
The least that I can do.
But a good chunk of this is on dialogue too. Writing duties are attributed to this game's director, but they just scream sweary at times, especially with its attempts to try to sound American. Regardless, the intro is just an exposition setup for the character's background and motivation, which of course in these kind of games is pure cheese.
Your pain is my pain.
The game's plot really wants you to believe that Dennis and Roger are just the tightest of bros. It even tries to give you some very thick backstory just as a means to tying it all together in the finale, as found in many B-movies in fact. The game tries to center its plot around Dennis and his regret-fueled motivation, caused by the guilt of losing his best friend Andrew. It's made him devoted to protecting Andrew's girl, Cindy, who still blames Dennis for his death, and this detail will pop in every so often just to remind you. After the game tries convincing you that Roger is your titular bro and that Dennis has a system, your plane's engine inexplicably blows up and you have to parachute your way down to base. Luckily, you and best bro Roger aren't too far away from one another.
I'm freezing my ass off waiting for you.
It's here, in the game's prologue, where you're shown a good chunk of what the gameplay is going to consist of. That is, shooting, knife slashing, and awkward platforming. As a kid, the game always reminded me of two things, Resident Evil and The Thing. But to my surprise, the game does venture off that path. At least, a little anyways. Dennis doesn't move in tank controls, and your weapon aiming can be done in both first and third person. When in third person, you have to lock into place to adjust your aim, and it even locks onto targets for you. Your primary weapon is this ridiculously customizable military rifle, and I mean it's crazy the amount of attachments you get for it. Throughout the course of the game, you'll acquire various sights for it, along with secondary weapon attachments like a shotgun, flamethrower, grenade launcher. Seriously, by game's end, you can even get a missile launcher for it. You also have your lucky trusty knife, which is surprisingly strong, but the strong strike can be hard to aim, and I felt that the weak cuts were rarely if ever useful. In this section, you'll pick up a small battery which is needed to operate small electronics, such as doors, elevators, and computers, the latter of which you'll need to be able to save in the game. Once you meet up with Roger, you both partake in an adult-sized slide, and you both split up to perform some reconnaissance. As with any horror game, it paces itself before showing you any kind of threat, but soon, you'll come to meet what will become your most common enemies, these leeches. It's only once you have the power restored to the facility that you'll see Roger get the old horror-style best friend treatment, getting swarmed by the leech-like enemies and mutating into a fleshy homunculus. Man, Roger was a pretty bad marksman. I'm just saying. Anyways, a mysterious woman intervenes, aka totally not Cindy, as the intro was setting you up for. She informs you that the facility is doomed and suggests turning back right away now. She also gives you your very first vaccine, which you'll have to rely on if you want to avoid infection. Yeah, this is the other principal mechanic of the game, the infection percentage. All enemies in this game can infect you with the mysterious virus, typically by spitting their quote-unquote infectious liquid at you. This isn't a huge issue for most of the early game, but over time you'll find yourself more and more surrounded by enemies, increasing your risk for infection. You can always use booster shots to reduce your infection, but if you hit 100%, your max health drops down to 60, and slowly your health ticks down to 0. When you reach max infection, the only way to recover is by going to one of the safe spots that has an MTS treatment terminal, as booster shots can only reduce infections below 100%. I'll admit, I kinda like the tension made by this mechanic. You'll find yourself running desperately fast, evading monsters, just trying to find your way back to the treatment terminal before the virus takes you over. It's a satisfying moment just narrowly avoiding death. The problem, sadly, is that these terminals aren't super uncommon. In the middle of the game, you'll encounter safe rooms where there is none, but to be honest, a treatment area is never too far off. Same thing goes for the battery system in the game. It's attempting to do the very same thing that the early Resident Evil games did with ink ribbons, and trying to reduce the amount of saves, so that it can create more anxiety and tension in the way you play. But almost every safe room has access to a battery charger. So yeah, you can save as much as you want, it's not a big deal. Likewise, you don't really need to be concerned with ammunition management because most safe houses allow you to get a full stock, but it only applies to your basic rifle rounds and not any of the attachments you can get later on. After getting your first vaccine, you move on trying to meet up with any and all survivors of Fort Stewart, as you try to unravel the mystery of this infestation. After Roger bites the dust, the game has you crash trains to open up the next area, but if you're not paying attention like I was the first time, it can and will kill you. Once past this, you'll have to deactivate the emergency shutdown sequence set up by this room, by, of course, memorizing the code that the mystery lady gives you. Traverse a series of dark rooms, forget the password, look it up online, and deactivate. At least that's how it was in my experience. You'll of course encounter the mystery woman again, who in surprising turn of events is Cindy, who clearly still harbors that aforementioned ill will towards the protagonist. She further reiterates that the facility needs to be destroyed, very subtly hinting as to what your end goal is. Plus, she references her favorite REM song, so that's a bonus. It's in this cutscene here where I first noticed the music. It's not bad stuff, but boy, it is melodramatic to say the least. And it definitely creates this hilarious dissonance when combined with the pretty corny voice acting.
What on earth happened to this place? What's going on down here? How do these monsters fit in?
After the cutscene, the game really starts to pick up, as you'll have your very first boss encounter, which is actually quite easy since it has a giant bullseye as to where to aim it for critical damage, Otherwise, it's just a bullet sponge. Its attacks are easy to avoid since they're quite telegraphed. It's a very simple fight, sure, but it does function to ramp up the challenge because up until this point in the game, you've only been fighting those leeches and nothing else. After killing it and going down the elevator, you'll meet Travis Miller, a photojournalist character who kind of serves as an additional guide. Honestly, this character serves very little purpose in the long scheme of things. The game's plot has a fair amount of what I'd like to call dead-end threads, and swerves that it tries to play off as major, but are really footnotes at best. This is best seen when you make it to the water filtration camp, where you meet the commanding officer who, in his dying breath, tells you that there is special water. Yeah. Before this, you've already started encountering sentient water, so that's not new. And we've gone from ripping off the Thing to ripping off the Abyss. Double nice.
I'm dead.
The game also takes a page out of the Tomb Raider book with all the maneuvering, but anyways, you'll eventually come up to another big safe area, where you'll meet Sonya and also the rest of your unit. It's here where you'll enjoy all the levels of expositing, telling you all the things you've come to expect at this point. But hey, Swery gets to have his name dropped here, so that's cool. It's here where you'll officially be given the go to blow the whole base up. And you'll accomplish this by arming the detonators that every top level facility has set up on the ready in the event of, complete hell. You have to do this at 2 labs and eventually make your way to the power reactor. The game at this point does actually start ramping up in difficulty. New enemies are being introduced, and you of course have your standard horror fare in the ways of mutated dogs and bats, but you also start encountering these mutated behemoth military men who've weirdly enough fused together with their rifles and are capable of shooting you in many different directions while spasming. I keep picking the weird games, don't I? You'll also start noticing that you're revisiting areas from the very beginning of the game, only now they look as though they've been slattered in meat and gelatin. You could play most of this game as a pacifist, by the way. The only real benefit to actually killing the enemies is that enemies don't respawn. That is until you progress further enough in the story, and then they all come back irregardless, so your pick. It's in the last third of the game where I felt that I hit a wall. A literal wall known as the second boss, which is probably one of the worst visually designed bosses, but I think that was par for the course back then. So this boss, despite only having 3 attacks, took me an embarrassing amount of tries to beat. I was definitely slacking on the day I first got to him, but let me try my best to explain my case and divulge what I think is a set of minor flaws in the game. So, like all major enemy fights, it has that big crystal eye to aim for massive damage. Well, by this point in the game, you'll come to realize that your aim is slightly off. You see, the game shows you this very large purple blood splatter to indicate a successful hit. Anything else is minor, almost inconsequential damage. So even if you're aiming at the eye, you have to adjust the game's sense of aim to actually get anywhere in the fight. This might have been a means to replicate a realistic rifle sight, where you have to adjust for rounds veering off a little bit, but still, it's something you have to learn. Secondly, boss fights in this game can be very monotonous. This fight and the final boss rush suffer from repetitive attack patterns, where the challenge lies in your ability to continue the pattern and not flub it up. The only remedy to the monotony is utilizing a stronger weapon, but that can result in the fight being over in a second. If you don't miss, that is. This fight with the wall creature nets you the grenade launcher, but I just kept missing with it. Again, because the aim is off. I got so desperate that I tried seeing if I can damage it right before the cutscene, but no dice. Eventually, I reached near automation levels of execution, and I beat it with the rifle. But can you guess how many hits it took? Or how long? The total fight took me 47 successful shots over the course of 13 minutes to do. And I counted. The funny part? If you can get used to aiming the grenade launcher, it dies in like 5 hits. This game is weird. Anyways, we're basically near the end at this point. We meet up with the remaining members of the unit, and the game tries to throw you for a loop and paint the Major as a bad guy, only so it can make him into a great guy in the end. Again, plot. After you climb up and meet up with the Major, the area starts tossing you a bunch of healing items, which can only mean one thing: another boss fight. This time against Roger, whose mutated body further mutated, and oh boy.
Dennis.
They really want me to be him. Boy. They really want this to be an emotional fight, but I'm saying it again. Their attempt to hit this mood really makes it silly, but in a fun way. Anyways, after you take care of Roger, you get a final moment with the Major, who blows himself up alongside the power reactor, proving that he was a cool guy the whole time. I kinda halfway expected a T2 style thumbs up, but no, we're not ripping that one off today. After that big explosion, we're back to the very beginning of the game. Yeah, you come to see how small the scale of this game really was with all this level of backtracking. In the moments leading up to the finale of the game, you meet up with your crew of survivors and you make it to the lab, where you discover the origin of the virus, along with the delusional scientist that has taken towards protecting this alien virus-producing fleshy slab. Man, this scene is so hammy, and I love it.
I can't let you do that! I'll kill you if it will save my precious. I'll do anything to save him, to save my baby. I'll do it for the love of my son.
Crazy bastard.
The scientist even gets his comeuppance in a very typical fashion. Well, now it's only time to run and blow the whole thing up while speeding away in a hovercraft. Now, in many cases, the game would have potentially ended right here, but nope, it's still going, and you guessed it, it starts handing out a bunch of ammo and a bunch of heals, which can mean only one thing. The final boss here is a 3-phase fight, with Phase 2 being the most challenging of the bunch. Phase 1 is just repetitive the moment that you make it to the turret, but it at least doesn't last as long as the wall. You just gotta shoot it every time it comes out the water. It was at Phase 2 where I messed up the most, as the boss can both shoot a good amount of projectiles and can overrun the deck with leeches. So you kinda have to take the first shots to take it down, otherwise it'll run wild on you. The final phase is the most boring, and the most puzzling, as the bacteria takes the form of Dennis, which none of the supplementary material ever hinted towards, not that I saw. This fight is weird. The boss doesn't even move, and just shoots in all directions, and the only real threat to look out for are the projectiles that are being shot off by the back of the fleshy mass. I get the impression that this last phase was tacked on as a means to pad out the game, but nonetheless, I beat it, and in the most sloppy manner, but beat nonetheless. The ending shows that the whole crew of 3 survived, and most importantly, Cindy learns to forgive Dennis. The game fades out, and plays a doo-wop song. Why? Extermination is like a B-movie, in more ways than one, both in the level of execution, and honestly, in my level of enjoyment. The team making this clearly had some good ideas when they started out, and it shows through the level of control that you have over Dennis, and in some of the set pieces, but it does falter in overall level and game design. The game's plot is largely forgettable. While it may have borrowed some of its ideas from great horror works, it stumbles in recognizing why certain plot elements worked and why certain gameplay motifs are effective in survival horror. With all that negative stuff out the way, I had fun. Sure, it's far from being on my top lists, but I enjoy the campiness of the game, and some of the ideas do land here and there. When the game came out, it received fairly good reviews, but it likely started to get outshined by other games. That demo disc I showed you earlier? Yeah, that had Final Fantasy X on it. Also, this game came out 1 month before the PS2 version of Code Veronica. It's easy to see why this game faded to relative obscurity. and resulted in the company going under after only 2 games, which I think is a shame. I think as far as first efforts go, it's a solid 6 out of 10. Not something I will continually revisit, but good for a short fun time with some laughs throughout, and it's a game I'd recommend to anyone who has a taste for the corny and the macabre. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to my channel.